If there are two actions that can best describe the first months of the Biden administration, they would be executive orders and spending. I've talked about executive orders in the past, so today I want to delve into spending. Specifically, the idea that Washington, D.C. can spend money on anything Congress can appropriate. Federal spending on anything they find popular is not a 21st century phenomenon. It's not even a 20th century one. James Madison dealt with Congress's spending habits all the way back in 1817. How he dealt with them is something the American people need to learn today if we are ever to rein in an out-of-control government. So we'll discuss that next on the Constitution Study.
There's one thing you have to know wherever you make your stand. Came from a long through line of everyday Americans.
Hello there, everyday Americans. Paul Engel here with the Constitution Study, where we read and study the Constitution. We teach a rising generation to be free. I'm glad you could join me. You know, these are very interesting times, and information is everywhere, but good information seems to be at a premium. So if you want to find out what's going on and what the constitutional view of life is, head over to constitutionstudy.com and you can find out more. I post these articles, videos, podcasts, all of it there for you to use, for you to learn, and for you to share. While you're there, either sign up for the newsletter or just click the book, and I will give you a free copy of my book, How to Read the Constitution in 30 Days. It's a digital download, so you'll have it immediately, and you can start reading the Constitution for yourself. And although most people only takes about 30 minutes, you can make it a daily habit to read and study our Constitution and teach a rising generation to be free. So check that and all the other material out at constitutionstudy.com. So now let's talk about this idea of infrastructure spending. Spending bills are nothing new. Neither are infrastructure bills. The question that faced America early in her existence should be the same questions we are asking today. What are the limitations on the federal government? On March 3, 1817, President James Madison vetoed a spending bill that Congress had sent him. In his veto response, he wrote, quote, "To the House of Representatives of the United States, having considered the bill this day presented to me entitled An Act to Set Apart and Pledge Certain Funds for Internal Improvements, and which sets apart and pledges funds for constructing roads and canals and improving the navigation of watercourses in order to facilitate, promote, and give security to internal commerce among the several states, and to render more easy and less expensive the means and provisions for the common defense. I am constrained by the insuperable difficulty I feel in reconciling the bill with the Constitution of the United States to return it with that objection to the House of Representatives in which it originated." Now, per Article 1, Section 7, Clause 2 of the Constitution, which requires that the President return the bill to the House that originated it with his objections, quote, "Every bill which shall have passed the House of Representatives and the Senate shall, before it become law, be presented to the President of the United States. If he approve, he shall sign it, but if not, he shall return it with his objections to that House in which it shall have originated, who shall enter the objections at large on their journal and proceed to reconsideration." While the reason President Madison vetoed the legislation is simple, it is also quite important. Not only does it show the proper role of a presidential veto, it's an example to all those who would ever hold that office of the checks and balances created by the Constitution of the United States. President Madison makes the point in the very first paragraph of his veto message that he cannot reconcile the Internal Improvements Bill with the powers delegated in the Constitution of the United States. The remainder of the letter is his explanation of the difficulties he sees. Quote, "The legislative powers vested in Congress are specified and enumerated in the 8th section of the first article of the Constitution, and it does not appear that the power possessed to be exercised by the bill is among the enumerated powers, or that it falls by any just interpretation within the power to make laws necessary and proper for carrying into execution those or other powers vested by the Constitution in the government of the United States." When the Affordable Care Act was being debated in the House of Representatives, a reporter asked then Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, where the Constitution gave Congress the authority to pass an individual health care mandate. Her response? "Are you serious? Are you serious?" While those in politics and the media today are not serious about the constitutional limitations, the American people should be. President Madison recognized that spending money on infrastructure was not among the enumerated powers delegated to Congress in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. And since infrastructure was not among the powers the Constitution vested in the United States, Congress did not have the power to make laws necessary and proper for executing that power. President Madison goes on, quote, "The power to regulate commerce among the several states cannot include a power to construct roads and canals and to improve the navigation of watercourses in order to facilitate, promote, and secure such commerce without a latitude of construction departing from the ordinary import of the terms strengthened by the known inconveniences which doubtless led to the grant of this remedial power to Congress." The only way to consider building infrastructure part of the power to regulate interstate commerce is to ignore the language of the Constitution. This also explains why some have gone so far as to include childcare, preschool education, even paid leave as infrastructure. Allowing those in offices created by the Constitution to reinterpret it in any way they want is not liberty. It's not even tyranny. It is despotism, which Noah Webster defined as, quote, "absolute power, authority unlimited and uncontrolled by men, constitution, or laws." One of the justifications Congress provided for the 1817 infrastructure bill was to make it easier and less expensive to provide for the common defense. Wouldn't that justify an infrastructure bill? What did President Madison think? Quote, "To refer the power in question to the clause to provide for the common defense and general welfare would be contrary to the established and consistent rules of interpretation, as rendering the special and careful enumeration of powers which follow the clause nugatory and improper. Such a view of the Constitution would have the effect of giving to Congress a general power of legislation instead of the defined and limited one hitherto understood to belong to them. The terms common defense and general welfare embracing every object and act within the purview of a legislative trust, it would have the effect of subjecting both the Constitution and the laws of the several states, in all cases not specifically exempted, to be superseded by the laws of Congress. It being expressly declared that the Constitution of the United States and the laws made pursuant thereof shall be the supreme law of the land, and the judges of every state shall be bound thereby, anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary notwithstanding. Such a view of the Constitution, finally, would have the effect of excluding the judicial authority of the United States from its participation in guarding the boundary between the legislative powers of the general and the state governments, inasmuch as questions relating to the general welfare, being questions of policy and expediency, are susceptible of judicial cognizance and decision. If the common defense and general welfare clauses of the Constitution allowed Congress to make any law they thought would fit those purposes, then the entire structure of the Union would be turned upside down. No longer would the states be sovereign over their internal matters, since Congress could nullify any state law with a federal one. Furthermore, the people would no longer have control over their state governments, since the constitutions that form them would be subject to the whim and will of Congress. No longer would the federal government be exercising just powers by the consent of the governed. Rather, they would become the despotic tyrants we see today. However, what if the states approved of Congress spending money this way? Well, President Madison said, quote, "If a general power to construct roads and canals and to improve the navigation of watercourses with the train of powers thereto be not possessed by Congress, the assent of the states in the mode provided in the bill cannot confer the power. The only cases in which the consent and secession of particular states can extend the power of Congress are those specified and provided for in the Constitution. Since state governments are just as bound to the Constitution of the United States as the federal government, they cannot authorize it to do something outside of the powers delegated in the Constitution. Just because the states have abdicated their responsibility to act as a check on the abuses of the federal government, it does not make them right nor legal." So what are we to do? How could important essential infrastructure work be completed if the federal government cannot do it? Aren't those projects just too important to ignore because of the little issue of constitutionality, Mr. Madison? Quote, I am not unaware of the great importance of roads and canals and the improved navigation of watercourses, and that a power in the national legislature to provide for them might be exercised with signal advantage to the general prosperity. But seeing that such a power is not expressly given by the Constitution, and believing that it cannot be deduced from any part of it without an inadmissible latitude of construction and a reliance on insufficient precedents, believing also that the permanent success of the Constitution depends on a definite partition of powers between the general and state governments, and that no adequate landmarks would be left by the constructive extension of the powers of Congress as proposed in the bill, I have no option but to withhold my signature from it, and to cherishing the hope that its beneficial objects may be attained by a resort of the necessary powers to the same wisdom and virtue in the nation which established the Constitution in its actual form, and providently marked out in the instrument itself a safe and practicable mode of improving it as experience might suggest. Part of the failure in government today comes from the tearing down of the partition between the state and federal governments. If these projects are so important, and if they are authorized by the Constitution of the states and the United States, then the states can fund them. Why should New Yorkers pay for improvements in Florida, or Tennesseans pay for fixing roads in California that have been neglected? If these projects are so beneficial, let those who would directly benefit from them pay for them. Why do the American people act like only Washington, D.C. can get these projects done? Well, for the same reason Willie Horton said he robbed banks. That's where the money is. For the last century, the American people have allowed their state governments to become dependent on federal money. With the authorization of the federal income tax and the removal of state representation in the U.S. Senate, the states have made themselves subjects of Washington, D.C. Not only have the states succumbed to bribes coming out of our nation's capital, the people have as well. Why else are so many clamoring for federal programs that are not authorized by the Constitution? While there is plenty of blame for those who work in our state houses, the real blame is the people who hire them. The spending spree that has marked the beginning of the Biden administration is not a compassionate act. It's bribery. The American people are selling their birthright to freedom and liberty for a few coins borrowed in their own name. As Alexis de Tocqueville said, quote, "The American public will endure until the day Congress discovers that it can bribe the public with the public's money." It appears not only has Congress discovered that they can bribe the public with their own money, but that the public likes it that way. So much for the future of the American Republic. I find it both amazing and disturbing that of all the news articles I've heard, all the episodes I've seen and heard that talk about the infrastructure bill and all of the recent spending spree, rarely is the question of constitutionality even considered. They talk about fiscal responsibility. They talk about legislative responsibility. They talk about pros and cons and benefits. They never mention the fact that it's all illegal. Why? Because we, the people, allow our elected representatives to ignore the Constitution, to ignore their oaths of office that require that they support and defend the Constitution. So as much as we like to point the finger and blame, ultimately, this is all our fault. What are we going to do about it? Well, we continue to sell not only our birthright, but the birthright of our children for a few coins, for a bowl of pottage. Will we accept money illegally gotten just to keep ourselves comfortable? And how long will that comfort last as those we have hired to exercise our sovereign power continue to criminally enact laws that are outside of their purview? And how long will the American people allow criminality in their government? President Garfield said, if Congress is ignorant, reckless, and corrupt, it's because the people tolerate ignorance, recklessness, and corruption. You see, this infrastructure spending is nothing new. We've been dealing with it for 200 years. Why have we lost what James Madison recognized? That the powers delegated to Washington, D.C., the powers delegated to the government of the United States are limited and defined. And if those we hire to exercise those powers go beyond that, it's our fault for letting them keep their jobs. So again, head over to theconstitutionstudy.com, find out more. If you really want to learn and study, if you want to get more involved, check out constitutionscholars.com. That's the site I set up. It's where a group of scholars can get together. We can read, we can study, we can teach each other. It's broken down not just over the U.S. Constitution, but the constitutions of all 50 states. So you can join your state group and be involved there as well. You can find friends and neighbors and other people just as interested and just as willing to stand up to protect not only their rights, but the rights of their children. So head over to constitutionscholars.com, sign up is absolutely free, and see what is going on over there. Find out more, become part of the solution, not simply someone sitting back and watching it happen. If you found this useful, if you found this video useful, please consider donating over at constitutionstudy.com to keep these videos going. I'm heading up on the first loop of my Knowing Your Rights tour, and I'll be going through the upper Midwest. I have events in North Dakota and Wyoming already scheduled. Head to constitutionstudy.com/tour to find out more. You can donate to the tour, you can find out where I'm going, and if you would like me to come visit your location, well, you can request that there as well. That's constitutionstudy.com/tour. Hopefully you'll find all this very useful enough that you'll come back here and join us once again on the Constitution Study.